Hi everybody, Jonathan here from Gravitee. We're very excited to announce Gravitee 4.6 and as part of that, the Gravitee Kubernetes Operator 4.6. There are two big highlights that come with this release of the operator. The first is that the operator now can support declarative configuration of subscriptions. So we've expanded the scope of what you can do with the Kubernetes operator. The other one is that the Kubernetes operator now also supports native Kafka APIs. So you can declare as code Kafka native APIs which expose Kafka to the consumer and connect to a Kafka broker on the backend. So in this video, we'll dive into the subscription use case and we'll talk a little bit about the Kafka stuff in another video. So the first thing I want to show you here is my Gravitee environment. So I have a Gravitee API management console here, and so far I have nothing here that is managed by the Kubernetes operator. And what I want to show you now is how, thanks to this new enhancement to support subscriptions with GKO, you can now create basically a bigger part of your API stack in an automated way using GitOps and using the Kubernetes operator. So we're going to go ahead and create basically an API which has a plan. We're going to create an application and then declare a subscription from that API, from that application to that specific API's plan. And we're going to be using JWT to do this. And we're going to be using Gravitee Access Management as the identity provider. So the first thing I'll do is we'll run through a few of these basic resources. If we head over here into VS Code, you'll see that I have a project here and I have an API definition here. So this is a v4 API definition. This is a custom resource definition and I've instantiated a resource here. I've got an API which is called API v4 JWT. And this API is exposing a path here called /phrase. On the back end, it's hitting a target which generates a random phrase. And you can see there's a plan here defined, which is called JWT plan. And it's configured basically to verify signatures with my Gravitee Access Management instance. Okay, so we also have an application here. So this is an application that I've called OAuth application. Again, this is a Gravitee custom resource definition. And you can see that this one is a type OAuth and a backend to backend application. So Gravitee will know that this application is going to be using Gravitee Access Management on the backend, and it could be any other IDP, like you could be using Ping Federate or Auth0 or anything else to register this application. And finally, I have a subscription resource here, which is basically a relationship between an API and a plan from that API and an application. So I'm actually going to move this plan up here to look a bit nicer. So basically a subscription is what ties an application to an API's plan and declares that this application is now allowed to consume this API's plan. So let's go ahead and create some of these resources. So I head over to my terminal here, and if I check out the pods I've got running, you'll see I've got the Gravitee Kubernetes operator running here on Minikube on my machine, and my Gravitee API management instance is here in the cloud. So I'm running GKO locally and it's connecting to Gravitee Cloud, which is absolutely fine. Now I'll go ahead and head into this use case JWT folder, and let's go ahead and apply the first thing I'm going to apply actually is a management context. So I'm going to go into contexts and here apply a management context, which is just going to point GKO to the right environment that I want to be using here. So you can see here that my management context includes some information for connecting to my Gravitee API management control plane. So now the operator can use this to connect and interact with the APIM console. Cool, so next now I can create my API. So let's go ahead and create this API here called API v4 JWT. So now that I've performed this operation, the operator has reconciled the API, and if I head into my control plane, you'll see that I have this API v4 JWT API, which was created. It exposes that /phrase path that we talked about, and you can see the origin is Kubernetes. So this API is managed by the Kubernetes operator, and you can see that everything is read-only because the source of truth is now the operator. And if I go to consumers here, you'll see that JWT plan. And if I look into this JWT plan and we look at its configuration, you'll see it's configured to use Gravitee Access Management to validate those signatures. Cool, so my API is now available. Let's create the application. So I'll go kubectl apply on that application. Very cool, it says it's created. So let's head over to the console again and check it out. So if I go to my list of applications here, we now have my K8's OAuth consumer app, which was created. Again, you can see the origin is Kubernetes and everything here is read-only. And what you'll notice is that I have a client ID and client secret that were assigned to this application. The reason for that is that I've configured Gravitee to use access management to register applications and manage the client IDs and client secrets. So if I head into access management here and I look at my list of applications, I now can see this new application that was created and that was provided with this client ID and client secret. So again, this could be Ping Federate, it could be Auth0, it could be a Keycloak or whatever kind of IDP you want to use. Now, very good. So the last thing we need to do is to create a relationship between the application and the API through the subscription. So I'll go ahead and create my subscription. Great, that's created. Now if I want to see this in the console, I need to head over to my API, open it up, head to the consumers where I've got that plan. And if I look at these subscriptions, I now see a subscription that was created. So everything here that I've shown you has been created as code using my Kubernetes manifests. And the great thing about this is that now my application can request a token and can go ahead and consume this API. So if I go ahead now and let's go to Postman. Actually, the first thing I'm going to do is go to my application and copy the client ID. And I'm going to use Postman to consume my API. And I'm going to first go ahead and generate a new token for this application. So I'm going to copy the client ID here and the client secret. So you can, I'm putting myself in the shoes of the developer that's going to want to consume this API, and I'm requesting a new token. So let's go get new access token and use that token. All right, so now I'm authenticated. Now I can go ahead and call the API. So as a reminder here, the endpoint was /phrase. So I'm just going to update this endpoint and make a call. Cool. And you can see I've got a 200 OK. I've returned a phrase, so I've managed to consume my API by setting everything up declaratively using the Kubernetes operator. You can come back into APIM here and you'll see in the logs and traffic that I now have a call that was made to this API using that plan. Okay, now the next thing I'm going to do is show you how beyond doing this manually, you can automate the way that you create some of these things using tools like Helm or other automation frameworks. Now, let's do a little example with Helm. So I'm just going to go ahead first and delete my subscription. And by the way, if I delete the subscription here and I come back to the application and try and make that call again, you'll see that I get a 401. So I'm really able to, without touching the API, without touching the application, control that subscription and create and delete it and allow access like that. Now I'll delete the application and I'll delete the API just to clean things up. And I'm going to show you a little example using Helm. So the reason I want to show this is because one of the main use cases for using the operator in this way is that you might be a platform engineer or an architect building a developer platform in your company that includes API management. And let's say a developer comes to you and they say, I would like to deploy a microservice. I would like that microservice to be exposed to the internet. And I would like, a consuming application to be authorized to consume my service. So those are the kind of things that you want to be able to sort of shift left so that developers can easily request to deploy applications in that way. So as part of your platform, you might want to expose a very simple interface to your consumers, to your developers in your company, so that they can just come along and say, here is my application I want to deploy. Can you please automate the deployment of this for me and everything else that comes with that. So what I have here is a very simple values.yaml file. So this is for a Helm chart. And you can imagine basically a developer coming along and saying, okay, I'm going to deploy an API called the Phrase API. The target backend endpoint I want to connect to is this one. I want to deploy an application, or I want to authorize an application to access this API, and this is the name of that application. And I want to create a subscription for that API, for that application to consume in that API. So basically, the developer can come along and provide a very minimal amount of information to your platform, and now you can instantiate all the required resources to automatically go and deploy that API. So if I look at the templates that I'm going to instantiate with this Helm chart, I'm going to instantiate an API definition, I'm going to instantiate a application, and I'm going to instantiate a subscription, which connects that application to the plan inside that API. Okay, so 3 resources, 3 templates in this chart. Now if I go to my terminal again and I come back here. Now if I install this Helm chart, very cool. I can now have a look at my Gravitee API management console again. And this time you'll see that I have another API here, which was created by the Helm chart called Phrase API. So very similar API to the previous one, but you can see the path is different. If I open that up, you'll see in the consumers tab that there's a plan. And if you look at the subscriptions, you'll see there's actually a subscription here that was already created as well for my application. Awesome stuff. So now, of course, if I come back to applications here, I'll see this application. This is not the same one as before. You can see the client ID and client secret have changed. So if I go ahead and like copy these, come back to Postman, regenerate a token for this application. Okay, and of course the path for this API is different. It's Phrase API. I should now be able to consume it. Great, I'm doing that. And so instead of creating each of those resources individually, I've created a Helm chart, and the Helm chart has instantiated the API, the application, and the subscription that relates both of those objects. Again, using JWT and an external identity provider to verify those token signatures. So now, of course, I've got this end-to-end example working. If I wanted to deactivate this subscription to prevent the consumer from being able to consume this system, I can just go ahead and, for example, list my subscription objects here. So I've got my custom resource here called subscriptions Gravitee.io, and I've got a subscription listed, so I can actually go ahead and just delete that subscription. And now if I come back and try and make a call, you'll see that I get an unauthorized because that subscription was deleted. So if I come back to my API here in the control plane and check it out, I go to the consumer tab and look at the subscriptions, you'll see that subscription is gone. I've now deleted it. So that's how you can manage basically now an end-to-end lifecycle of an API, its application and subscriptions, all with GKO. So you can do a lot more automation and build really great platforms for the developers inside your organization. Shift left and self-service enable them to deploy their applications and expose them to the internet and expose them to consumers. That's it for this video. Thanks a lot. Cheers.